Windhager, Wood, inside 50. Wanganeen Miller! What a mark!
G'day everyone and welcome to the GameDay Squad Aussie Rules Fantasy Show. I'm Pitty and alongside Haz, we are the Fantasy Bros. We've partnered with GameDay Squad to bring you everything you need to know to succeed in GDS Aussie Rules this season. And to help me preview a big round 12 is Haz himself again. Haz, how are you, mate? Different circumstances this week where we're coming to our listeners with. Thanks for jumping on the live preview show as always.
Look, I'll just go out there and say straight away, I wanted to do it on Tuesday night to start the year because it suits me a whole lot better than a Wednesday does, that's for sure. So obviously, yes, we are coming to you in a pre-recorded show that's going to be released at our normal time tomorrow afternoon. Obviously, we've got some different things going on this week in the State of Origin on tomorrow night in the rugby league side of things. So just a couple of things going on in the world of sport right now. And we thought we'd come to you with a pre-recorded episode, and yeah, my night off training. So like I said, it suits me perfectly, mate. But anyway, enough about me. How are you going?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. And it doesn't suit me so much. I've got the baby I wanted to hear, so I'm on standby just in case. We'll see if we get an interruption throughout this recording, mate. But anything for our viewers and listeners, hey, so this is being recorded Tuesday, the 26th of May, about 8 p.m. here. So keep in mind, things can change between now and Friday, of course, or Thursday, I should say, and when teams come out. So we'll see what happens in the meantime. But as always, for our new listeners, make sure that you're getting on board with GameDay Squad if you haven't already. And of course, subscribing to all our Fantasy Bros socials. We're across all platforms, so YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TikTok, Facebook, and Insta. Just make sure you search at Fantasy Bros AU. And as I said, get started in GameDay Squad. If you haven't already, if your other fantasy platforms going to rubbish, then jump on board and make sure you use that code on screen, FBAR26. You can get yourself 3 9-player common packs just for doing so, and you can rip right into the best fantasy sports platform going around. Now, Haz, before we move on to round 12, we've got a big round to preview. It's our first buy round of these mid-season buys, so a bit to navigate here tonight. But before we do, round 11, how do we go? Kick us off. What were you like around the grounds?
It's probably the first week in a while that I didn't think I had a pretty average week. I was pretty happy across the board. I feel like we nailed the picks that we talked about last week. Obviously, just, good, consistent performances across all my squads. Best finish there, as you can see on screen, was 4th in Sunday Showdown. I thought I was a genuine chance to secure my ticket, but just a couple picks. I played Adam Treloar and that kind of let me down there. But other than that, general performances, I had 3 top 10 finishes across Classic, Challenger, and Contender in my standing competitions. Obviously pretty stoked with that as well. Kind of puts me back up the season rankings a little bit in that search for prize card come the end of the year. But what about yourself, mate?
Yeah, pretty good. Probably not as good as yourself there. The 3 top 10 finishes is, absolutely elite and a bit stiff, mate, that you just missed out on that ticket to the Sunday Showdown finals as well. I'm sure you'll get a hold of that soon. But yeah, pretty good week. I was pretty solid. Like, I'm happy with it. As I said, I sort of struggled those last few weeks, mate. So it's nice to get into that top 10 finish in Classic and, like you said, push for that prize card contention because I think it's going to be tough this year to secure a prize card. We've talked about this before, mate. So if we can do that, that would be unreal. Yeah. My best finish was 6th in Classic. So, yeah, absolutely stoked with that. And like you said, a lot of those picks we sort of, we're talking about last week with Bales on stream and you and I were conversing about all week. They came to fruition, which was really nice. And obviously, we'll get into our stars and scars now. Probably one of the biggest stars for me this weekend and for you. It's not Lachie Neale and it's not Jordan De Goey, although they were very good for us. And I'm sure we'll talk about them in a sec. It's the man center on screen, Dill, Fantasy Bro Dill. He's our star for the week because Sunday we were sitting there. Well, again, I don't know where you were, mate. I know you were busy, but I was sitting there on the couch with my son and he wanted to watch the race cars. And I said, okay, you can watch right up until, the bounce of the Lions game. And it meant that I actually was going to miss the Lachie Whitfield news as a result of that. And then if it hadn't been for that message we got from Dill, I would have genuinely missed it. So, 10 minutes of fixing all my squads. I replaced him with a Bailey Dale Silver in Classic, and I was very fortunate enough to have a good finish as a result, mate. So, what about your stars there?
Yeah, so just touching on Dill as well, he did come out first in starter for the round this week just gone, and he's 3rd overall in the starter overall standings for the season. So, Fantasy Bro Dill is absolutely killing it in the AFL side of things. And like you said, I probably would have missed it as well. I was actually cleaning the house and doing a bit of housework just before the Lions game, and I saw that notification, and everything got put down right there and then because like you said, it took 10 minutes to fix all my squads, and luckily Dill messaged with about 12 minutes before the game. So just got in there in the nick of time. And like you said, you replaced him with a Dale, and I think I replaced him with Bowie. So definitely worked out well as a result, instead of copying that donut that Whitfield would have given us. But other than that, obviously, you guys talked about last week, Jordan De Goey. He was my star this week. And it's probably more because I backed my gut instinct. I was hot on Tom Sparrow at M7 pretty much all week. But I did make the late change to bring De Goey into my classic side as that, F7. And yeah, he was just unreal. 130 GDS points against the Eagles last week, and Pendles' game-breaking record game, I should say. So yeah, he was an absolute star. But then obviously, as on screen you can see there, my all-star Grundy, which was sitting in my classic side, it was very, very disappointing for me. He nearly dropped out in my classic side, which is very, very disappointing. And he's the second time he's got the scar in 3 weeks. So last time he bounced back big. Let's hope he can do the same again. And that all-star will be sitting in my classic side once again, no doubt, once we talk about the Rucks, because he's got another juicy matchup this week.
Yeah, that's it. He gets a bit of a rocket this week, and hopefully we do see him bounce back, because that was a disappointing performance. And, the other star on screen there for us, Lockie Neal, for me, I was stoked with his performance. I was pretty solid on him being at my M7 all week. I felt really confident in what he was going to be able to do. I did expect a Lions bounce back, which didn't occur. We actually did have a bounce back. We did a bounce backward.
Yeah.
We've struggled. So we're hoping we're going to do a bounce forward this week, if we want to call it that. But yeah, had him, so 127, had him for gold rarity. So I was really happy with him in my classic side, just rounding out that midfield, because that's been a position I've struggled to pick in recent weeks. And Justin McInerney is the scar for the week. He's not someone I've played a lot this year. I've played him here and there, and every time I play him, he disappoints me. And every time I play him, he reminds me why I don't. He's the hardest watching football, I reckon, for me. He just has a habit of going missing, and I can't stand him. I really can't. And I'm going to play him again this week. So let's hope he does bounce back. Sometimes that's the way to go in fantasy sports, is if you leave your team unchanged, sometimes they actually go pretty well the next week. So look, we'll ride it out, and we'll see how we go. Make sure you drop a comment on our YouTube video or in the Spotify comments as well. Who was your star for the week? Who was your scar for the week? And I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of people out there who, Lockie Whitfield, that laid out, I'm sure that would be their scar for the week, mate. But look, tell you what, somebody else who's very lucky not to cop a mention is Patrick Voss from the Freo Duckers. He's very lucky not to cop a scar from my squad, because he went out and tagged Callum Wilkie to within an inch of his life. So probably should have thought about that last week when talking about him, because he did that to James Sicily when the Hawks played over there a few weeks ago. And I just had vivid flashbacks. Yep. So very disappointing there, because I had Wilkie sitting in my side, and Patrick Voss, as I said, bit of a drive-by for him.
Yeah, look, if we put Patrick Voss on screen, I would have hoped that people would think we're not either suggesting him or the fact that we played him. Obviously he did that really good job on Cal Wilkie last week, and it definitely helped Freo go a long way to beating the Saints, definitely late in that game as well. Yeah. So, no doubt we're about to touch on probably Wilkie once again as another option, because he's just so reliable. Obviously that 83 points was his season low, we're talking completed games. And then obviously McInerney as well, that was another season low. So maybe we've just caught him at a bad time. And like you said, we're probably looking to play them again and just trust the player that they are and the elite ceiling that they potentially have as well.
Yeah, we'll see. There's a few defender options this week that I'm liking as well, so we'll chat about those in just a moment. But before we do, let's have a look at some of those matchups there on screen, mate. So looking for this week, round 12, the first round of the mid-season buys. As you can see, let's start down there, that bottom part of the screen. 4 teams on a buy this week, so you cannot be picking players from the Adelaide Crows, the North Melbourne Kangaroos, the Port Adelaide Power, or the Gold Coast Suns. So there's lots of popular players, mate. We've got obviously your Christian Petrarcas, your Harry Sheasels, for example, down in our forward line there. Obviously, Rankin Rochelle down there. Jordan Dawson in the midfield. Zach Butters, for example. There's heaps of big names we can't be picking. Tristan Cherry and the Ruck, that's just to name a few. So we're really having to, dig into our collection this week and fill out a pretty solid side. Do you want to talk us through the fixtures you see on there, mate, on screen?
Yeah, I think this is definitely the moving time of the season where probably the cream of the crop will probably rise to the top. Obviously, kind of test our knowledge just a little bit. You can't just rely on your plug and plays every single week. So definitely, obviously testing us as well to bring out some picks that are potentially going to help coaches, but obviously testing our knowledge as well to just go outside that box a little bit more. But that brings us to obviously our round 12 fixtures, which is the first lot of buys for the season. In our Stats Lab primetime fixtures, obviously brought to you by Stats Lab. It's the Saints versus the Hawks on Thursday night. And then on Friday night, we have the resurgent Carlton up against the Geelong Cats at the MCG, I think it is. And then on Saturday, we have the Sydney Swans against the injury-depleted Richmond Tigers. I think I read or saw that they have 19, maybe even 20 people on their injury list for this week. So don't know how they're going to field a side, and it could be an absolute bloodbath.
At the SCG.
At the SCG. Lions against Freo. Obviously, Freo's on that 10-game winning streak, and the Lions are coming off one of their worst losses in recent memory. The Dogs up against the Pies to round out Saturday's fixtures. And then on Sunday for our FantasyBros Sunday Showdown, we have the D's versus the Giants and the Eagles versus another injury-depleted side in the Bombers.
And that's it. That was an interesting game, that one. I was looking at targeting that potentially a bit yesterday when I was looking at building some squads. Recently, we've had the news today that Brad Scott has been given the chop. So they're going to be having an interim coach take over for them this weekend. We know what happens when an interim coach comes in. So a few of those picks I was looking at for the West Coast Eagles, it's making me double think them a little bit and maybe erring on the side of caution, so to speak. So we'll have a chat about those particular players once we get to those lines. But yeah, a few good games going around. Obviously, there's a few we might want to target, and that Bulldogs and Collingwood game should be a cracker.
Yeah, for sure. I just can't wait to obviously get it on Thursday night. I think the Saints Hawks is going to be a cracker as well as get the round started. So keen for that. And I'll be at the Lions and Freo game. And I just hope that the Lions can actually, turn up this week.
Oh, 100%. We both hope that, mate. And again, surely they do. We talked about that with last week with Bales. We've been saying it for so long. They rarely put two poor performances together in a row. So the fact they did last weekend just makes me sort of hope and expect that that's going to turn around. But speaking of the Lions, somebody who should be back this week, one of our plug-and-play defenders is Dane Zorko. So he should be back this week. They said he'll be right to go after they took that conservative approach again last week against the Giants. And, like you mentioned to me, mate, I think that they really missed his ball movement there of halfback, and they'll be excited to have him back in the side. So Zorko should be there for you to pick in your sides this week and just double-check when teams are released that he's actually named, and obviously that he's not laid out for whatever reason, but he should be playing. The only thing with Zorko is that the Dockers aren't necessarily the best matchup to target, but we just know how good the little magician is, and we also know they're playing at home looking for that bounce back too. So should be a good pick nonetheless. Lockie Whitfield, he's the interesting though one, mate. He's that laid out. Do you reckon he gets up this week, given they have their bye next week?
I don't think so, actually. I think the more reports that keep coming out about it, the more I think he's going to miss this week. I think it was Friday last week. They kind of just had a thought, he might not play, and kind of kept it under the lid until Sunday. He did his fitness test before the game, and it didn't get up. And I think they're probably just going to conserve him. Obviously, they are playing in Darwin this week, so he might even just stay back in Sydney, have that extra rest going into the bye. So no, it wouldn't surprise me to not see him this week.
Yeah, be prepared for that potentially. And before we get into those three picks there on screen, as we can see who we've got Bailey Dale, we've got Cal Wilkie, and we have Jake Bowie again. Before we get into those, mate, a couple players not on screen we might want to touch on who are always quite popular. Josh Dacos and Dan Houston. They are not filling us with confidence lately, are they? Even though they're coming into a positive matchup against the Bulldogs under the lid at Marvel, you would expect that's a game we like to target, that matchup. It's just very hard to pick them with any real confidence. I think Josh Dacos had an extremely poor start on the weekend against the Eagles. He copped that Milan Murdoch tag like we spoke about last week. We weren't quite sure who it might have gone to. We avoided both as a result, and at the end of the day, it was Josh Dacos who got it, and he was lucky to get that score in the end. He really worked into the game and built that score, and Dan Houston just really struggled across the whole day. So, I think, coaches could probably go there given how popular they are and the positivity in the matchup, but they're just not feeling with confidence at the moment.
No, so Josh Dacos, obviously, like you mentioned, got Murdoch tagged and fought his way to 82 based on a pretty decent second half. I think he nearly scored 50-odd points in the second half, but Dan Houston, only the 50 GDS points. And obviously, we know how hot he was to start the season, and he's definitely dropped off the face of the cliff. So, yeah, no doubt they're going to look to bounce back at some point. It's just a matter of when, and it could quite easily be this week against the Bulldogs. Probably not looking to play both of them. Once again, it's one of those coin flip decisions. If you're going to play one, who's it going to be? I probably have more confidence in Josh Dacos at the moment than I do Dan Houston. So if I am looking to target that matchup, it might be him. But I think, once again, I might look to avoid both just with the form they're in.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing is Dan Houston's shown us his floor a couple times this season, and Josh Dacos just finds a way to get it done. So, even though 82, 83, that's not a score we want to have on our field. There are a couple other players that put up a very similar score. Cal Wilkie, namely, he's a good example of that, and I feel like from memory there was another one as well that I'm forgetting about that put up an 80 score. John Noble as well. He would have been popular last week, given the form he had been in, so that there was a few players scoring around that. So Josh Dacos, if he was your only one back there putting up that score, might not have burnt you too much, but a Dan Houston, that one stings. So yeah, I think I'm Dacos over Houston personally. But yeah, it's just hard to pick him, isn't it? But someone who it's not hard to pick is a Bailey Dale. I'll let you talk about your man Bailey Dale and why we might want to be picking him this week in our sides, because he was a great pick last week.
Yeah, so I was pretty hot on him last week, and obviously he hasn't gone below 100 since round 5. And you got a 98 then as well. So he's had a clear role shift since that halfway, point of the first 10 weeks of the season, and he's really starting to fire now. And obviously we talked about a couple of weeks ago, Connor Buderick coming back into the side and what that might mean for Dale, but he's just clearly their best ball user. They love it in his hands. He had 125 on the weekend against the Demons, and he had 91 in the first half. So he is an absolute gun. And I think that a lot of players actually slowed down in the second half last week. It wasn't just Dale. It kind of seemed to be a common trend of put a score on the board in the first half. And Jack Ross, there was a couple that kind of just hung up the boots at halftime and called it a day. But obviously, 125 as a replacement for yourself for Lockie Whitfield. You're definitely going to take that every day of the week. He took 6 kick-ins last weekend, the 7th the week before. And the next best of the Dogs is Buderick with the 2 to 3 kick-ins per week. And that's just pretty much, just saying how much that role is Dale's as that main distributor in the back line. Obviously, he's got Collingwood this week, who are a good matchup for opposition defenders, and especially designated kickers. They're the 4th best matchup for the season, the 7th best matchup over the last 3 weeks. And interestingly enough, the 3rd best matchup for opposition designated kickers, according to DFS, in the last 5 games. So if you're looking at the role, you're looking at the matchup, you're looking at just the way he just collects disposals at will. He's got good form against the Pies recently, 120 in round 2 last year and 148 in round 12 the year before, which averages out at 134 GDS points over the last 2. So I think the role, the matchup, the form, you just lock him in.
Yeah, tick, tick, tick. It's every box we like to have ticked by our players when we're picking our squad. He's ticking it, isn't he? And he's great to watch. We know he's got a ceiling, and that's what we want to hit in these rounds, in these buy rounds, where players are, coaches, GS coaches are going different ways in these buy rounds and digging deep into their collections. If you can pick a player who's got that ceiling, it can give you the edge, on any given week. So I love that pick, mate. I think I'll be loading him into my side, and I'll just be questioning, am I going to put some salary on him? Am I going to roll out a bronze? We'll just have to see how we go, I think. But somebody else who I'm maybe less confident on is a Cal Wilkie. All right. So we might have to talk this one through, because I'm not confident if I'm going to play him again this week. I know how good he is. I know how consistent he's been. I'm just not sure, because He's obviously tagged to within an inch of his life, as I mentioned earlier, by Patrick Voss. And as I said, I can't believe I didn't think about that because I saw him do it to, James Sicily a few weeks ago when they played over there. And it might be Jaden Short down the bottom of the screen. We're going to talk about as one to fade. Maybe fade a Harris Andrews this week. If anyone's keen to play their Harris Andrews, maybe not this week because every chance he could go and do a very similar job on him because they're having a bit of success when he does that. But Wilkie still managed an 83. So that, it's not the worst world given the circumstances, not the worst score in the world, given the circumstances. But look, this week up against the Hawks, they're the third hardest matchup for opposition defenders. So the matchup's not there on paper. And they're the fifth hardest team to score against in the last 3 weeks. His recent form against them has been up and down as well. He had 58 in round 17 last year and 132 in round 9 the year before. So again, up and down. Surely we can pick him based on form, but I also feel that, there's probably some other matchups we might like to target.
Yeah, it's one of those difficult ones. And obviously, we had this discussion today in person that we're talking about potentially, are we chasing the safety play of a Wilkie, knowing that he can be just so consistent and so reliable? Or is it maybe a week when we are picking from a limited player pool? Are we chasing the upside of players with the potential ceiling? Yes, obviously, we know Wilkie does have a ceiling on his day, 154 and 144 this year. And he is back under the lid where he's had 4 scores over 105 GDS points this season. So, yeah, look, he's probably, once again, a safe play. Opposition might potentially put some attention into him. Don't know who. But obviously we could see the effect that Freo did have on him last week, and it impacted obviously the way the Saints were playing coming out of the back line because they do rely on him. So, yeah, it is an interesting one. At the moment, I don't think I'm going to be picking him. I'm probably going to lean to the ceiling of maybe a Dale or a Bowie or maybe even Amon, obviously, on screen, just because I know they probably have a better matchup over what Wilkie does against Hawks.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's probably something we do have to consider when picking. Like, he's come up against those big scores he's had. West Coast. The couple others in there that sort of stand out to me as, I wouldn't have thought he'd go that big is the Adelaide and Port Adelaide one. He went quite big against those two there. So that was round 5 and round 6. So he had scores of 151 and 154 against them. They're the ones that surprised me a little bit because I wouldn't have expected him to put those scores up against those two, those two teams who we typically think are pretty solid matchups. But, if you're looking at the data there as well, see, they're neutral to almost difficult to score against. So that's kind of Cal Wilkie. He can do that sometimes. Yeah. But if you look at a Brisbane Lions, for example, where they played them in round 3, 109 GDS points. So I find this one hard to get a read on. I think I might be keen just to maybe chase a few other scores there, mate. And speaking of, you just mentioned a Jake Bowie. Have you got a Jake Bowie in your side that you've been building this week?
I think he's probably going to be in maybe 1 or 2 of my sides. I just don't know which sides yet. Obviously, he's come back and hasn't really missed a beat in his first 3 games back from injury. 113, 109, and 120 GDS points in those games. And last we spoke, he has the market share down and back for the Demons as their key ball user. He took 7 out of the possible 9 kick-ins last weekend, and it was the same the week before. We talk about some players like a Justin McInerney who are high handball to kick ratio players. Jake Bowie is the complete opposite. He is just a sheer number of kicks in that high kick to handball ratio. He's had 19, 17, and 21 kicks in his 3 games back from injury. They just love the ball in his hand. Obviously, the D's are in really good form. They'll be looking to bounce back after their loss to the Dogs last weekend. So I think they'll be trying to use Bowie as much as possible. They face the Giants this week at TIO. They are the 7th best matchup for opposition defenders this season, and they're the 3rd best matchup in the past 3 weeks. So it shows that they've got a bit of recent success against them. We've seen some good scores from defenders up at TIO in favourable matchups across rounds 9 and 10. Noble scored 154 and 159. Yulin scored 138 and 128. Rioli scored 126. Andrew 2 tons. Farrell 100. Sinclair 100. plenty of points going around for defenders. So he should be another great shout this week.
Yeah, I love that. Those conditions, the fact it's at TIO, it almost tips me over the edge, having seen what some of those defenders have done. And yes, keep in mind, there's only been a couple games up there recently, and the Suns have been heavily involved in both. So I guess the Suns' game style is something to keep in mind, that might be a reason as to why some of those scores are the way they are. Same for the Saints. But yeah, I'm pretty confident, mate, at Jake Bowie this week, given the limited supply of players we're picking from. I'm pretty keen to roll him out in my sides this week. And if you're comparing to a Cal Wilkie, like you said, well, Jake Bowie shouldn't in any given day cop attention from an opposition player like a Cal Wilkie might last week against the Dockers. So yeah, I'm pretty keen to roll out a Jake Bowie, chase a good score, and be relatively confident with what we're going to get. And somebody else I'm also really considering playing this week is someone who was mentioned in the chat last week on the live stream. Miyanji Gaming mentioned Carl Amon last week, and we weren't super keen, Bales and I know you probably weren't either, with that Adelaide matchup down in Launceston. Didn't scream like one we wanted to pick him for. But this week he comes up against the Saints at Marvel Stadium. So we know that the Saints are always a pretty good matchup for opposition defenders. Interesting though, like they're actually, where would I have them? They're the best matchup to target for the season to date.
Yeah, wow.
But funnily enough, recently they're actually the fifth best. So still a good matchup to target, of course. But it's just funny that recently they haven't been giving up the same amount of points we typically expect them to give up to opposition defenders. So just something to keep in mind. And if you look at DFS Australia as well, of course, and if you look at diving deep into which type of defenders are scoring against the Saints, it's those designated ball users. So that's the seventh best matchup for the designated kickers in the last 5 games. So again, that's positive for a player like Carl Amon, who has got such a good kick, and they use him off halfback. And I think, what, funnily enough, we're talking about Carl Amon here, but I also think Jarman Impey is also a bit of a shout in this same game too. He's been in incredible form. He's had what's his scores there? 119 and 111 in his last 2 against them, which is similar form to Carl Amon.
Yeah,
mate, I'm gonna have to pause there. I have to go help.
Yeah, no, all good.
Kennedy, just give me 2 seconds. I'm so sorry.
You're all good.
Forgot there too. We'll have to make note of the time.
Yeah, it's about 27.
Let's see how that goes. Is that going to work?
Just pulled a Bailey Smith plat from a unique pack from Rewards.
Oh, nice. They've dropped, have they?
Yeah.
That's so good. Be keen to rip a couple. All right, sorry, mate. We'll see what we can get through.
Yeah.
Hey, it might be a bit hit and miss like that. I apologise. I'll take my phone with me next time just in case it takes longer than normal. I can at least talk to you.
No,
so we'll pick up from Jarman Impey. I reckon to speed this up too. I reckon let's get talking about like all that. I reckon we'll just do bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Like you say a little bit of those dot points. I'll say a little bit. If we miss a couple of things out, I don't think it's too bad. But I reckon we just try and breathe through as quick as we can.
No, all good.
I think you were going to come in about Impey.
I was just going to talk about both of them.
All right. You jump in when you're ready, mate.
All right. So it's about 17. No, what was it? 27.
Yeah. Sorry. Did you write that down?
I didn't write down it was around 27 to 30, or say 32.
Cool. I just wrote that down.
Right.
Sorry, mate. You
All
go.
right. Yeah, so I think both Hawks boys this week are probably a really good shout. I think I'm probably leaning more towards an Amon. Yes, Impey has been good from a football perspective, but I think Amon's scoring is probably have a higher ceiling. If we're looking at the matchup, especially with St Kilda, I think his running carry would definitely challenge St Kilda. So yeah, I'm probably leaning towards more an Amon this week. And I think obviously, as Mian said last week, you're kind of putting it forward. And I think whoever answered it was either you or Bale said we're probably going to be looking at him for a few weeks to come because they do have quite a few good matchups coming. So he might be someone who, once he's in my side, it might be hard to remove just for that fact that he has some good matchups. He's got majority of the ball use alongside Impey down in the back line, and he can hit a ceiling on his day.
Yeah, I love that. And before that game, he's had scores of 125, 137, 133, 138, like super consistent. So yeah, I think he's one I'm really tempted by this week to get into a couple of my squads. And could a Tom McCarthy also tempt you, mate, this week up against the Bombers? As we spoke about, injury ravaged and depleted Bombers side over at Optus Stadium. Is he one that is going to get you interested? Because we've talked about how the Bombers, they are, for this season, they are also a really good matchup to be targeting. Now, I think I said for the season it was the Saints, for example. It was the Saints who were the best matchup. But recently, that was yesterday when I had a look at it. This has recently been updated, and it's now got the Bombers as the best matchup. And the Saints have actually slipped to second there. So, not much of a difference between the two. Obviously, they're both two very good teams to target. So the Bombers are one we do want to look at. There's got to be someone we could potentially pick, and it could be a Tom McCarthy.
Yeah, I don't mind Tom McCarthy. He scored 119 last week in another positive matchup against the Pies. He had 30 disposals. I'm just trying to pull up his kick-in numbers because obviously he does have the majority of the ball use back there for the Eagles at the moment. He's kind of seemed to hit his straps recently as well.
Has he as well been
8 kick-ins? 8 kick-ins on the weekend, which is a
cool.
Season second most behind 9 that he had in round 5 against Geelong in gather round. So that definitely probably, I don't know how many points Pies actually kicked last week and how many of that is West kick-ins he had for West Coast, like as in total. But yeah, I think McCarthy's probably another good option. But if we're looking at, I guess, maybe the ceiling, yes, it is a good matchup. I still think it's a very good pick. But I'm probably going to go for more consistency. Dale, Bowie, even probably Wilkie probably come before a McCarthy for me.
Yeah, I'm the same. I think just in all those kick-ins as well, Josh Lindsay took the next most with 4, and then Liam Baker took 1, and Ruben Jimby took 1 as well. So he still has the market share of those kick-ins. The week before he split it, it was 5 apiece between he and Lindsay, and Liam Duggan then took 1. But, I think that experiment of him through the midfield is probably over. He's now playing off that half-back flank. That's where they want him behind the footy. My other knock on a Tom McCarthy, obviously we spoke about how the Bombers this week, new coach, interim coach, we don't quite know what they're going to throw up. That's the scary factor in this. And Tom McCarthy is one who I don't think he has a ceiling. The best score he's had for the year is 131. The next score behind that is 119, 118, 116. But then he's got some 70s in there too. I remember looking at him, it would have been round 7, I reckon, and he put up a 73, and that would have been a positive matchup from memory too. St Kilda.
Yeah, he scored 71 against GWS in round 10, who are another good matchup of late. So, yeah, he definitely does have that floor scoring in, that's for sure. So I think that's probably another reason I'm looking to steer clear of if we're talking about not playing Wilkie for consistency and we're looking to target ceiling players. McCarthy probably doesn't have a ceiling and he's definitely not consistent. So probably not the pick to be playing maybe this week despite the matchup, even though he could still easily go 120 plus.
Exactly. If he's ever going to hit that ceiling score, it's probably going to be this week against the Bombers. So keep that in mind. But yeah, I think that's why someone to mention, someone to talk about. I know there'll be a few coaches keen to go there. And yeah, I think obviously playing on the Sunday there as well, aren't they?
They
Sunday
are. So
they do. So
lock him into Sunday showdowns for sure.
Correct. Absolutely. Lock and load there. But now, mate, our avoid, obviously, Jaden Short this week. People think we're crazy, I reckon, after the score he put up last week, 149 GDS points, but comes up against Sydney now at the SCG. So they are not a great matchup for opposition defenders. They're very tough to score against. They're actually, in terms of a Jaden Short, they're actually his 4th worst matchup for his career to date as well. So he hasn't got a great history on them. It's at the SCG. You obviously probably still could pick him. He's not like he's going to give you a 40 or 50, but he's just one that I'm not chasing this week, and nothing screams to me as a reason to pick him. So I think you can lock him in for a 160, mate, and he'll put that on our heads.
Yeah, look, no doubt, for sure, especially the form that he is in. But I actually have a feeling that James Jordan probably goes to him this week, and it's probably another reason to avoid as well. That Tigers obviously don't really have a clear standout midfielder who's going to be impacting matches. And if they are still looking to maybe tag the best or most influential player for the opposition, that probably is Short, especially after last week with that drive that he does give them off the halfback flank. So, yeah, look, I'm not keen on a Jaden Short this week for those couple of reasons. I think Sydney are looking for a big bounce back as well. Obviously, against the injury-depleted Tigers at the SCG, it could be a 100-point flogging. So, yeah, look, I'm not going to touch that.
Oh, yeah, it could be a long, long day. But if you pick him, just hope they kick a lot of behinds and he takes all the kick-ins. That would be the one thing you'd be hoping for. Now, mate, let's move on to our midfield here. Interesting week in the midfield. We've obviously got Jordan Dawson and Zachy Butters there on a bye in terms of our plug and play. So we've got Nick Dacos, Bontempelli, Bailey Smith, and an Isaac Heaney. So 4 really good options this week, and particularly Isaac Heaney, which we're going to like in that Richmond matchup. But in terms of our options, mate, you picked out a Maxi Holmes for us, Lockie Neal, and an Ed Richards, who's coming off a great game last week. Out of those 3, who was quick to go into your side this week?
It's actually Max Holmes. He's had a change in role, and I think I like him in his midfield role more than I do at the halfback. He probably gets more touches at halfback, but he just seems to get more points from a GDS perspective in that midfield role. So he was back to 61% CBAs last week against the Swans, which was up from 38% in round 10 and at 30% in round 9. So it was his highest CBAs since round 4 when he had 86% against the Hawks, which obviously last week that led to 130 GDS points against the Swans that have been the second hardest side for mids to score against this season. So doing it in a negative matchup as well was pretty impressive. He scored 100 GDS points in all but one of his games so far this season, and that was a 93 against the Power in round 7, I think it was. In the last 4 weeks, he's gone 132, 116, 104, and 130 to put him back in contention for a place as a plug and play in our midfields as well. 7 out of his 11 games this season, he scored 125 GDS points or more. So, look, you just got to look at that consistency once again. He has an elite ceiling on his day, back in that midfield role. Probably a good matchup and a good venue for him as well at the MCG. Plenty of space to roam, plenty of space to run. Definitely locking in Baz and Holmes this week.
Yeah, and do you reckon that role continues though? Like, will they persist with him in those CBAs? It's positive that it did get a bump up to 61%. I really like that. That was the big reason why I hadn't been picking him in the last few weeks, was because I questioned his ceiling with those low CBAs, like you just alluded to. His scoring's not as great back there. You expect that to continue this week?
Look, it's a tricky one because obviously Bruin was such a late out, and they called it managed,
Yeah.
and obviously he's been getting a bit of CBA action. So, look, he might just shift straight back to the halfback flank, but obviously they do have so many halfbacks, and I think they probably find that Holmes is maybe the more damaging midfielder with that 1-2 punch with Bailey Smith, especially when Smith gets attention. Um,
Mhm.
I think from a personal point of view, I think they look so much more dangerous and dynamic when Holmes and Baz are working together in that midfield. Obviously, they do love his run and drive off the halfback flank, but he's so damaging running forward of the ball and running inside 50. So if we're looking at who they're facing in the Blues, they're allowing the 5th most GDS points to opposition mids over the last 3 weeks. So if that midfield role was to continue, then he should be in for a really good game. If he does go back to halfback, then the matchup isn't probably as fruitful for him. Like the Blues have allowed the 7th fewest GDS points to opposition defenders in their last 5 games. So if we're just looking at some
Yeah.
success, obviously Jason Horne-Francis scored 157 last week, kicked 3 goals.
Called
Yeah,
it.
you did it. You should have played him, should have backed your gut. Butters 111, and then obviously we're looking at Neil 146, Bolton 158, Brayshaw 120 over the last 5 weeks. So there are some plenty of scores to go against. The Blues midfield, yes, they have had a bit of a resurgence with the new interim coach, but like I said, back at the G, the Cats are in form. Holmes in the midfield, hard to go against that.
And I guess if he's off halfback, right, like he's been putting up some really consistent scores, like you mentioned before. So even if he plays halfback, he can't be that poor. Like he'll still give you a fine score, and you might just consider the salary you're putting on him. But then if he's got that chance to go through the midfield, like you said, that could be anything against the Blues at the MCG, coming off that solid game against the Swans there. And the thing with Tanner Bruin, if he comes back into the side, then at least he's a versatile player. They might have looked at last week and gone, far out. Like we have Mr. Max Holmes running through our midfield. So even Tanner coming back in, well, he's got the ability to play behind the ball. He's done a bit of that this year. He's had low time on ground. He's gone through the midfield. Like he can play a number of different roles. They could just shuffle the magnets to work Maxi Holmes back in there. So tell you what, you might have talked me into playing him at my M7 at this stage because that's the position I'm tossing up. Actually, it's probably M6, M7. I'm not quite sure. It's going to be probably a conversation between, a Holmesy, a Neil, and a Richards. It's probably trying to squeeze them down to 2. So, in addition to a Maxi Holmes, let's talk through a Lockie Neal, for example. So it was the only line mid last week to actually, pull his finger out and put some effort in and give us a solid GDS score. And the form he's in is incredible. Like that's Brownlow form we mentioned last week. So that's 8 tons in a row now. And he's had a lowest score of 101 where he got tagged against O'Sheen Mullins. So he's gone over 110 outside of that in 7 other games. Highest score of 185. It's very hard to not look at a Lockie Neal this week and to turn him down. And you know what we've talked about this week with Lockie Neal?
But
Revenge game. Comes up against the Dockers. How could we not remember that? We've got revenge games. They're a thing. And I reckon that this could be one that has a little bit of substance to it. Freo is 5th favourite team to score against. But keep in mind, he hasn't actually played them for a little while, since round 21 of 2023. And the Dockers are also not a great matchup. So that's the other thing to keep in mind. For opposition mids, over the last 5 weeks, they're allowing the 3rd least GDS points. So that's 82.9 on average. So it's probably not one on paper it's screaming out as one to target, but it's probably one in the context of footy, for example, where you're looking at the form of Lockie Neal, Lions back at the Gabba, up against his old side. It could be one. Are you as confident in a Lockie Neal as you are in a Max Holmes?
Yeah, look, it's probably hard to go against a Lockie Neal. Obviously, we talked about the consistency. 7 games over 110 GDS points in a row, a ceiling of 185, another game of 146. I don't think he's going to cop any attention from any of the Freo midfielders. I think they'll just go out and try and beat Lions head to head. So yeah, look, it should be a great shout once again this week, despite Freo being a negative matchup for midfielders. But there's been some successes in the recent weeks. Kennedy scored 130, Bont 128, Richards 127 in their matchup against the Dogs. And then obviously Walsh went 157 as well against Freo. So plenty of scores to be had for main ball winners. And obviously Lockie Neal is that at Brisbane at the moment as one of those only midfielders that seems to be actually pulling his fingers both ways.
Yeah, he's the clear standout. I think if you're looking at Alliance mid this weekend, and you're probably outside of Lockie Neal, not looking at too many others in those standard
Yeah.
competitions. But yeah, the other player I'm splitting him with is an Ed Richards, coming off a 152 last weekend, which was incredible. We know that he's got a ceiling. That was a man of the match performance against the D's there. He had three goals, mind you, just to go with his 30 touches from 22 kicks. So he just does everything. He stuffs those stat lines. And he's now gone 127 plus GDS points in half of his games this season. So that's 5, for example. So yeah, he's been really, really good. And it's that ceiling we really like from an Ed Richards. And the thing why I looked at an Ed this week and why he really tempted me into putting him into a few squads is the fact they're up against the Magpies. And I feel like that's one that he can go well in that particular matchup. And going back at the data, we actually went and had a look. We found that the Pies are actually his second favorite matchup for his career to date. And, round 2 last season wasn't the best game for him. 109 GDS points in that one. But I just sort of feel that he's a different player now. Like even last year, it was probably during the season, like he really evolved as that midfielder for the Doggies, and he's continued that into season 2026. So we're probably talking about a different Ed Richards nowadays, and it's already been a positive matchup for him. The last 3 weeks, good scores against the Pies as well. They're a positive matchup for them, for those opposition mids. So I think that this could be one where an Ed Richards is one we're looking to play. The only little flag I have with an Ed, mate, is if you look at his scoring profile, like a Lockie Neal, it's probably not as consistent as what a Lockie Neal's is. He's got a nice ceiling there that he's hitting, but there's a few scores in there that are not like the others. So an 85 in round 7, an 84 in round 10. He'll just put a couple of those up every now and then. If he could get that out of his game, that would be unreal. But that's the only little flag for me this week. But I love the matchup, and I love an Ed Richards.
So I think the reason, obviously, you had a couple down games in scoring was he obviously was dealing with a couple injuries. I think there was an injury interrupted game where he kind of would have had low time on ground with that ankle, and then obviously it was a late out leading into a game. He had a couple of issues, but it seems to be 100% fit and firing. Time on ground's back up into the 80s. So when he's fit and firing, and especially at Marvel, he seems to rack up at Marvel as well. He seems to love playing there. Him and Bont together in that midfield for the Dogs. So, look, I'm definitely keen on him this week for that matchup against the Pies. And yeah, you just talked about it. It's probably the ceiling that you're probably picking him to hopefully replicate that this week.
Yeah. So that's an interesting discussion then in terms of which bids you're going to go with, because there's a few there. And then obviously someone we don't have on screen or in the plug and plays column, who a lot of coaches will be looking at this week, including ourselves, is a Zach Merritt. Coming up against the West Coast Eagles, that screams as a matchup to target. But I think he also screams as the clear number one player from the Bombers for West Coast to shut down. And we know that they've got some players there like a Brady Hoff or a Milan Murdoch, depending what they want to do. They've got the weapons there to be able to do it. But we also know Zach Merritt, he's built a bit different. So it could be maybe a him you're tossing up. And then maybe, you're thinking about a Neal, a Richards, or also a Maxi Holmes there too. So some interesting picks this week. Is there any one of those 4 you got on the outer a little bit? Because at the moment it's Maxi Holmes, but I think I've got to work him in somehow. I've got to get him in. And God, it scares me to leave Zach Merritt out.
Sure. So just quickly on Merritt. So West Coast are his 5th best matchup for his career. Last 3 scores of 98, 132 and 128. And last week, his CBAs went up to 81% from 50% the week prior. So he's probably, obviously, that was probably injury based. Obviously, they had quite a few outs early on in the game. McGrath got injured, then Durham went off as well. So that was probably game based, situation based on that. But obviously, once again, new coach, Merritt is probably their best player, if not the best player at the club. He's probably just going to come in and go, you belong in the guts. Let's put you there. So, yeah, it's potentially scary thinking about fading a Zach Merritt this week, even if he does potentially get attention from a Hoff or a Murdoch. I don't see Murdoch doing it if he is playing in the midfield. It's probably a Hoff, if anything. But we've got to look at maybe the quality of probably Essendon in the matchup. Merritt got tagged by Finn O'Sullivan earlier in the year for that really low score when everyone was super keen on him. But I think at the moment where the Bombers are, they are needing a win. They will want to bounce back. They're probably going to want to try and replicate, this new coach luck that team seem to have. So I think Merritt's going to put his best foot forward again this week, and it's definitely a scary fate if you're considering it.
No, we can't leave him out. We can't leave him out. Just thinking about it, I think that's silly leaving him out now. So I think he'll stay in for me. I reckon, you know what? If we're going to split them, I reckon it might be you just hide behind the fact. There's probably two ways, to be honest. One way is you hide behind the matchup data and you just say, look, Freo's not the best matchup. Yes, it's at home, but therefore I'll go away from a Lockie deal, and it might be a Richards, Merritt, Holmes to round out your midfield. Or the other way is you could jump on the Stats Lab, if you remember there, and have a look at the played percentages by coaches just before lockout on, whichever day it is where you need to lock that decision in, and you just fade the least popular one. I reckon that could be the other way to do it potentially. Otherwise, if you've got a gut feeling, follow that. But yeah, I reckon for me, it might be a Neil at the moment I'm leaving out potentially. But again, more to think about as we go. Now, heaps of pods there on screen. We're probably not going to talk in too much detail about them there. They've all got very positive matchups, mate. You got Harley Reid up against the Bombers there at Optus. He could be anything. He had a huge 160 score a couple of weeks ago over there. And we know they're absolutely decimated with injuries. A Chad Warner. We know the Eagles are a good matchup. If we do think Hoff might spend some time on a Zach Merritt, Darcy Parish is coming off an incredible score too, so he's one to look at. Clary Oliver, he has the revenge game. Out of all those four, mate, who excites you the most?
It's tough because I do like all of them for different reasons. But it's probably Darcy Parish that I'm probably most excited about this week. Obviously, he was coming off that man of the match performance in a losing side at the Dreamtime at the G last week, which just shows how well he did play, not only from a GDS perspective, but from an actual games perspective as well. He racked up 41 disposals, 7 marks and 4 tackles for 155 GDS points. And that's backing up his 117 GDS points from round 10 against the Dockers, who we've just mentioned, who are quite a difficult matchup for opposition midfielders. And obviously, we've just mentioned it for Merritt. The Eagles are the second easiest opponent for opposition mids to score against this season. However, that does drop to the 6th easiest over the last 5 weeks. So for looking season long, 2nd easiest over the last couple of weeks, 6th easiest. With Nick Dacos, 157 last week. DeGoey's got 130. Crisp, 120. So there's plenty of points on offer against the West Coast midfielders. Clayton Oliver scored 131 the week prior as well. So if we're just looking at those scores, it's hard to ignore. Maybe someone that's in that form like a Darcy Parish, obviously bounce back factor, new coach, solid role. Eagles are his second favorite team to score against for his career. In their last matchup against the Eagles, which was round 8 of 2024, Parish scored 169 GDS points thanks to 36 disposals, 11 marks and 5 tackles. So is it potentially Parish's time to stand up once again alongside Merritt with so many Bombers out this week? Obviously, Captain McGrath's out, Durham's out. So plenty of midfield time to be won. And obviously, Parish could potentially quite easily take that with both hands and have another good game.
Yeah, it's just, I agree. And it's really tempting, that one. But it's can we trust Darcy Parish yet? That's probably the question for me. I really want to go there. I really want to play it again. If you've got a competition where you chuck some pods in, this is the one to throw in. But it's just, I'm not at the point where I can trust him in some of those comps I'm prioritizing. Obviously, Classic, probably namely. That's my only thing with him, but I love the shout, especially if we do think Zachy Merritt could call some attention from a Brady Hoff. He could zig when others zag and go a Darcy Parish for sure, giving off that form from last week. Probably the one that excites me is a Chad Warner. He's one that actually kind of excites me because I think that the Swans could absolutely do a number on the Tigers. And we know when teams do a number on other teams, they will score really, really well from a fantasy perspective. So if you look at Chad Warner, he's a pod for a reason. He can give you a ceiling score, or he can stink it up and ruin your week. If you like to roll the dice and you like to play with fire, then this pick is for you. They've allowed the 5th most amount of GDS points to opposition mids this season. But again, it's the injuries in the recent weeks, like the fact that they almost have no players left to select from. It just makes you wonder what they can do. So He had a massive score. Obviously, actually, before we talk about his scores, Tigers last week, for example, Merritt 172, Parrish 155. Week before that, or when they played the Saints, 137 to McRae, Garcia 132. Rankin had the big 190 as well. This is one where you just feel there's going to be a ceiling score, right? Isaac Heaney, he's probably the number one culprit. You probably think he's going to have a big one. The Ruck Pig, he'll have his nose in the trough. You think he'll have a bit of a ceiling score. The other one that could pop his head up is a Chad Warner. I was just trying to think as well. I don't think I have that big ceiling score he put up a while ago. Oh, that was one more, mate.
144 against the Dogs in round 7.
That one. And that was where, what happened that game? Because that was Daniel Schloss that threw that in the comments of our live stream. And he picked him.
So he kicked 3 goals from 20 disposals, 4 marks and 7 tackles. So he had 14 CBAs.
Heaney was out.
Yes, Heaney was out.
That's the game Heaney was out because we had him as our primetime pod for the week. And then that was your mate, Daniel Schloss, who mentioned and said, keen on a Chad Warner this week with Heaney being out, bumping CBAs, a few more points going around. Doggies are giving up some points, particularly Ford. I think that was the time where they were really struggling with their defense.
Yeah.
And he just posed such a threat when he pushed forward to the ball. And he was piggish that night looking for those goals. I feel like this could be another night for a Chad Warner.
Yeah, look, I think you're probably relying on him definitely impacting the scoreboard to boost his score. 68 and 103 from his last 2 games against the Cats and Pies over the last 2 weeks. But yeah, outside of that ceiling score of 144, he's only got one other score over 110 GDS points for the season. So definitely, I think the biggest pod on screen and probably the most riskiest pick if you are looking to go there. I think the others are probably safer. But yeah, you're right. The matchup data's there. The recent history against the Tigers are there. And yeah, he could quite easily kick 4 or 5 goals and, be on his way to another ceiling score. But yeah, it's one of those things. If we're looking for consistency, especially in our midfield, when we're probably leaving out, one of those players that we've just mentioned before, either Holmes, Neil, Richards, Merritt, you got to leave someone out. And I don't know if I'm leaving one of those players out for a Chad Warner in my side.
Yeah. Like you said, if you're relying on hitting the scoreboard to get that good score for you, well, you're probably going to pick him for this week, aren't you? That's the thing. So, yeah, if you're going for it, if you've got a competition you want to throw some pods in, I think he could be one. Darcy Parish is a great shout. Clary, shout out to Clary. He's in great form. Clayton Oliver, absolutely unreal form. Revenge game this week. Bit of love to Clary. You can definitely go there. He'd be the safer one, I reckon, out of all these picks on screen. He'd be safest. And then Harley Reid has some upside in himself there too.
Yeah, so just on Clary quickly, obviously we've mentioned it's his revenge game, and it's the revenge game of all revenge games, especially the way that he left the Ds last year. And obviously he has rediscovered some of that All-Australian form that he had it while he was at the Ds. 146 GDS points last week against the Lions, and that was thanks to 37 disposals, 4 marks and 8 tackles. But gee, it could have been a lot more. He had 21 handballs and only the 16 kicks. So yeah, he's another one that we talk about. Handball happy. Week before, 131 GDS points against the Eagles, 38 disposals, but had 27 handballs. So if he looks to bump up his kicking game and get a bit more points, then obviously that scoring will be absolutely elite in our midfield. Obviously, he's gathering plenty of disposals, so could definitely be a pod this week, even though the Ds are relatively neutral matchup for opposition mids this season and over the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, and his tackle numbers will be up too. He'll be hungry for a tackle, I reckon, on a few of his old teammates there. And mate, yeah, Sam Walsh on screen as well. I think we're not super keen on that one, just with the risk of the O'Sheen Mullen tag. Potentially, there's every chance he could go to a Patrick Cripps, who's been in really good form and has been very damaging as well. Whether he gets Mullen or maybe a Mark O'Connor potentially as well, if he's in the side there. So it's just one for me where Walsh, he probably cops it a bit from us, doesn't he? He's probably a bit unlucky there. But it's just one that I don't have a massive amount of confidence in. No. But the one thing to flag is that he has actually got a pretty good scoring history against the Cats. He's had 108, 129, and 116 in his last 3. So although we're not super keen on the Sam Walsh, if you are, well, there's probably a bit you can hide behind a few of those scores there.
Yeah, completely agree. All right, Ruckman, do you want to talk us through it? Who are you most keen on this week?
Yeah, I think we avoid Tristan Cherry this week. Obviously against the bye there, he's not one to be picking, so make sure you don't have him in your sides. Look, I think it's going to be Brodie Grundy, right? I actually haven't done a lot of digging into our rucks here, so we're kind of doing this on the fly, which is probably a good conversation to have. We've got to pick two. I think it's got to be out of four. It's got to be Grundy, Gawn, LJ, or Darcy Cameron. I think we can put a line through Luke Jackson this week. Like, just keep this conversation really short. He's one you could pick, if you, especially if you've got an all-star card in Classic and you want to put him there. I think you still can. However, he's not one that's screaming out to me given the matchup against the Lions at the Gabba. The ruck matchup season to date is the hardest matchup against the Lions.
Yeah.
And we know that, like, yes, he is the number one man in terms of the ruck, but we do have, I just have some questions around an LJ. He's let me down a couple of times this year. Every time I go to pick him, he'll let me down somehow. But 106 last week was pretty respectable over in the West there in a tough matchup against the Saints. So he shouldn't be ultra bad, but he's just not one where I'm expecting a really good pop score from.
Yeah, no, look, I completely
Tough
agree.
day.
I just don't think the matchup's there this week, and I think there's probably better options from the other three. I think, like you mentioned, Brodie Grundy's probably the lock out of those ruckmen, obviously coming up against the Tigers, even though he is coming off that really down game last week in another positive matchup against Geelong. But I think Geelong obviously tried to work their game plan in minimizing his impact around the ground away from the ball ups or the boundary throw-ins. So I definitely think he's back on for another potential ceiling game this week. And hopefully, like I said earlier, he can go from scar, star, and keep that trend going this week.
So if we look at matchups, right, now they have Ollie Hayes-Brown, who's doing some rucking, don't they?
Yeah,
But,
he's playing like less than 50% time on ground.
so that's Noah Bolter still getting a run in the CBAs.
Yeah.
So I assume he's doing a bit of rucking.
Yeah, he's probably doing a fair portion of it, yeah.
So he's got 52% CBAs. I can only imagine that's him in the ruck, and then attending 48% of ruck contests around the ground too. So he will do a bit of rucking, and he actually posed a bit of a challenge to a Maxi Gawn going back a little while ago. So although it should be a good matchup there for them, and I'm still pretty keen to go a Brodie Grundy, that's maybe the one thing just to mention is that it's it's probably not going to be just an Ollie Hayes-Brown the whole time. They'll probably rely on a Noah Bolter to try and jump over the top of him. And he has posed a bit of a challenge there to opposition rucks of recently. So that's one little flag, but I still think we're going a Brodie Grundy.
Yeah, and look, it's at the SCG. Grundy loves playing at the SCG. And I think we obviously just talked about Chad Warner impacting the scoreboard. I think, like we said earlier, the Swans are potentially going to put a score on. Wouldn't surprise me to see Grundy kick one, maybe two goals as well. So his mark numbers were down last week. Tackle numbers were down. I think everything's just going to be back up this week. Possessions or the hitouts might potentially be down against a Noah Bolter with his athleticism, but I think he's going to make up the points in other aspects of his game.
Yeah, and colours were lowered, as you mentioned, so he'll be keen to bounce back. And I'm happy to back in the ruck pig, mate. If I had his 88 last week, then surely this week is better, so I'll be rolling him out again. And the other one now, if you go off Stats Lab's matchup data, the next best matchup you can target there is a Maxi Gawn. It's going to be him up against the Giants. The Giants are the third best matchup for opposition rucks this season. If we look at recently as well, they are the best matchup in the last three games. The GWS Giants to target. And last week, they obviously came up against the Eagles, and we saw what Bailey Williams for the West Coast Eagles, we saw what he did. He put up a 125 last weekend, if you don't mind. Bailey Williams. So this is one where with Max Gawn, he's got the matchup. And interestingly, if you're looking at the data for Maxi, we've talked about Max Heath. He's the problem. He's the only thing that's stopping me from going all in salary-wise on a Max Gawn. It's just that this Max Heath share role is clipping his ceiling, even though Max Heath isn't playing a huge amount of time on ground, and that's come down recently. Max's CBAs are up compared to what it had been. So maybe it's a sign that role is shifting a little bit. And hopefully, given the fact they lost that game, let's hope that it means maybe Maxi Heath is not there.
Yeah, look, I obviously raised that today in a discussion with you. I think Gawn's CBA percentages have jumped up over the last 2 weeks. They've gone from, mid 40s, low 50s to up to 70%, which obviously is not anywhere near what it was at the start of the season, but it's probably indicating that the shift between Gawn as a forward and Gawn as that sole ruckman has started to kind of creep back into the D's game plan, and probably looking at, obviously he's had over a bit of a month now to kind of have a bit of an in-game rest, obviously not actually having to rest completely. The D's are traveling well. Yes, they're going to look to bounce back after not a poor performance. It was a cracker of a game against the Dogs, but obviously a loss in a game that probably thought they should have won. And yeah, the Briggsy, like you just mentioned, it was Bailey Williams got 125. Williams actually scored 154 against Briggsy. So yeah, even better. Yeah, look, it's hard to ignore. Last week, if we're looking at how Gawn scored his points, yes, he only just kind of ticked over that 100, but he had 42 hitouts. Obviously, his mark numbers were down. He only had 2 marks and 0 tackles. But if we're relying on 40 GDS points just from hitouts alone, obviously anything up from that is just is a bonus, really.
Yeah, well, last time he played the Giants, he had 46 hitouts against him.
Yeah.
And it was a score for 145 GDS points. So, yeah, it's just, I think I'm probably going to go with Gawn as well, Grundy and Gawn, and play it really vanilla, especially given how popular Maxi Gawn is every week and the matchups there for him. I just find it really hard to go against him. And look, if Max Heath is not there, it really just makes our decision nice and easy, and you can probably expect that big ceiling score if that's the case. But we'll just have to wait and see. Look out for that in teams. But someone else on screen, it's probably the 3 for me, is Grundy, Gawn, Cameron, and then LJ is the one I like the least out of those 4 because of that matchup as we spoke about. But a Darcy Cameron last week, so he's got that solo ruck gig now, and obviously that's Oscar Steen, unfortunately, has gone out. Last week there, he put up a really nice score in that game there for the Pies. I'll just pull that up on screen as well so we can have a bit of a look. Darcy Cameron, so he had 143 GDS points last week, which is, against West Coast. We did flag that as a bit of a pod for us last week on the stream, and if you did go there, you'd have been very happy because he would have been, the best scoring ruck going around for the weekend. So you would have been very happy with that score and that point of difference. This week, again, coming up against a positive matchup there in the Western Bulldogs. So they are in terms of recently, they're the third best matchup you can be targeting. And Tim English, there's every chance he's still out. Now, he might come back into the side. He's been out for a few weeks now with concussion. But there's every chance they're still without him. It's not confirmed whether he's coming back or not. So if he does, what capacity is he coming back in? That's another question. And I think that Darcy Cameron could be one that you could definitely look at this weekend.
Yeah, look, I think if team lists come out and English is not named, I think I might look to split Gawn and Cameron across sides. I think I'm pretty set on Grundy as the number 1 ruck this week. But yeah, it'd be interesting. I want a piece of Cameron, especially if he's not going up against a Team English. Obviously, at Marvel, last week he racked up 28 disposals, 6 marks and 3 tackles, which just shows that he can boost his scoring across many different aspects of his game. So on his day when he's fit, firing, he has been a little bit injury interrupted. Obviously, like you mentioned, that shared role is no longer there, so it's all his. So yeah, look, he's definitely a good pick for the people that are looking to go there as the sole ruck now. It's just, obviously, I think if Gawn, probably once again, depending on team list, if Gawn plays without a Heath, I think he's a must lock play, regardless if English gets named or not.
Same as Grundy.
And I think if Cameron, then if Gawn is playing with Heath and Cameron doesn't play against an English, then it's potentially an interesting discussion to have a thought about as well with Cameron versus Gawn.
I think if English is not there, I think you can go a Cameron over a Gawn this week, because if Max Heath is there, we've just mentioned it's clipping his ceiling. Like, he got a 110 last week. He hasn't had that big ceiling score. And Darcy Cameron put up a 143 last week. And his last 2 against the Bulldogs with the Tim English there, it's been a 116 and a 129 GDS points in this very same role. So without a Tim English there, they obviously have Rory Lobb doing some ruck in there for them and a couple of youngsters going in there. So I think you could definitely easily go a Cameron over a Gawn because of that role, especially with an English out. So keep an eye on that. something to keep in mind, and maybe split them across your squads, like you said there has. Anyone else you want to touch on there quickly, or move on?
Now let's move on to the forwards. I don't think there's anyone that needs to be spoken about outside those four big boys this week.
Fantastic. Now, speaking of big boys, our big boys there in the forward line, the plug and plays, Cozzy Pickett, Sam Flanders, Justin McInerney. We think they're pretty safe locks this week again, but I do have a little asterisk next to Cozzy Pickett there, just because in the presser today with Adam Kingsley, head coach of the GWS Giants, there he's come out and said that Toby Bedford is very likely to tag Cozzy Pickett this week.
Yeah, right. That's an interesting one because obviously Bedford used to do tagging roles in years gone by, but he's been playing predominantly as that small forward pocket, half forward flank, and hasn't done any of those roles yet this year. So if that is something that they're going to potentially look to do against their Pickett, not only this week it is concerning, but moving forward as well, especially if he does a good job, it might be something that we have to consider every time someone decent comes up against GWS.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I'd fade him. Like I'm not going to go that far. I think I'll just play
this week.
No, given the reduced player pool with his first round of buys, hey, but I think that I'll just probably really consider the salary I'm putting on him, and I'm not going to put too much on there because we know how effective Toby Bedford can be. But it is just something I would flag, and if you are keen to fade him, well, maybe there's a chance to do it. But yeah, just it's going to be one to watch, that's for sure. Justin McInerney should be great against the Tigers. We've obviously got two big boys on a bye as well, Harry Sheasel and Christian Petrarca. We cannot be selecting those two in our forward line. So it's making our selections this week very, very interesting. And out of those options on screen, Tom Sparrow, Toby Green, and then we've got a couple cats you could maybe look at is a Jezza or a Brian Myers. I think out of those, I'm probably most keen on a Tom Sparrow again. He has been in such good form. Flagged him last week. He was a pod a few weeks before that as well. Just since round 7, he hasn't dropped below a ton. So he's had scores of 103, 117, 109, 118, and 137 in those games, in that period of time, in that midfield role. He's locked in there. Stephen King's loving what he's doing. I'm pretty safe with him in our forward line this week.
Yeah, look, I was red hot on Sparrow last week for the Bulldogs matchup, even though the Bulldogs aren't a positive matchup for the opposition midfielders. Scored that 103, which, obviously in our forward line is very respectable. So, yeah, look, if I'm just pulling up his CBA stats now. So he actually dropped his CBAs last week down to 63%, but the week prior was 76, 71, 73% CBA. So he's definitely in that mix of midfielders. And if Cozzy Pickett is looking to get tagged, they could even just send Cozzy forward and just say, we don't need you in the midfield. Go and impact the scoreboard. Be dynamic in the forward line, which obviously is only going to open up a midfield spot, which means that potentially Sparrow's CBAs get boosted once again. The only potential thing for Sparrow is he has been used in a bit of a shutdown role previously. So does he maybe try and shut down an Oliver or a Callahan? That's the only thing that I'm flagging, but he hasn't really done that this year. So, look, I'm pretty keen on him.
Yeah, it's a good mention, but I think that he's past that. I think they've realised what a weapon he can be for them and not worrying so much about the other team. And I sort of get that from a Stephen King. We know he has used a tagging role early on from a Colton Tolstrup, for example. He's done a little bit, but that's gone. We haven't seen that for a while. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy to back in a Tommy Sparrow. And if Cozzy gets some attention or maybe pushes forward, it's just a bit more responsibility on some of the other guys to lift, like a Jack Steele and a Tom Sparrow. So, yeah, pretty happy with him there in our forward lines, mate, just tucking him away. So they're probably ones I've got picked out. Is Pickett, Flanders, McInerney, Sparrow. Pretty confident with those four. Out of, let's say, Toby Green, Jezza Cameron, Brian Myers, which of those three then interests you the most next?
Probably Jezza Cameron this week. Probably not a outstanding matchup for him, but you just got to look at how he scored last week against Sydney. He had 3 goals. I think he had something like 20 disposals, lots of marks, getting up and down in plenty of the touches. So if he's not even impacting the scoreboard in big bags of goals, 5, 6, and he's just kicking, your 2 or 3s with those marks and disposals and getting up the ground, then he's nearly a must play every week. Obviously, yes, he can drop low when the game kind of dictates he sits forward and is the deepest option. But from what I've seen over the last couple of weeks, that hasn't been the case. So I'm pretty keen on him this week, I think.
In the round so far this year, he's had 270 scores. 71, 72, that was round 3 and round 7. Outside of that, his next lowest score is 99.
Yeah.
And then he's turning up. Like, he's actually been really, really consistent this season. And you talked about that Sydney matchup for him last weekend, 134 GDS points. And, he had, was it Brisbane the week before that from memory? Yeah. They towed us up, at the Gabba. Yeah, 103 GDS points in that tough matchup. And you said that this one's maybe not a great one for him. Carlton are his second favourite matchup across the course of his career. So, he even in those games, he's had 4 goals last time they played, 3 goals the time before that. But more importantly, his mark numbers are up in those games, and both of those games are at the MCG. Yeah. You go back before that again, 5 goals and 6 goals. So he just has a way of getting a hold of that Carlton backline. And he's one that, again, I haven't been picking a lot this year. And with the reduced players, this is a great chance to jump on board. And with Arnie Booger, ride the Cats train, cheer on the Geelong Cats, and hopefully some big scores there. So come on, Jezza. But could you also go his teammate, Brian Myers? So obviously that ACL concern, or he has an ACL or lack of ACL or whatever is going on that he's got. But he scored 111, in his second game, I'd say back, but he's not really, I don't know, he's just sort of looking after it. So is it still too risky to go Brian Myers, or is he someone we could round out our forward lines with?
I think it's probably dependent on the cards that you've got, I think, and it's also probably dependent where you might be playing those cards. I think obviously in your example there, use that all-star card of yours, obviously you're probably looking to play that, in a challenger competition. It's hard because you just don't know when a potential issue is going to arise with that knee. He could get through the season unscathed and go into surgery. He could have a slight, bend of the knee, and all of a sudden his season's done. So that's the risk that obviously he knows he's taking. He's come out and said he doesn't know if he's smart or stupid, or if he's paving the way for more athletes to be like him. So he doesn't know what's going to be the outcome either. So that's something to potentially be aware of if you are looking to pick him just in these early days, coming back from injury so soon as well. Obviously, he did get through that VFL game. So it's 3 games post-injury that he's got through unscathed now. The matchup probably says that he's probably going to have a good game. Obviously, he gets up the ground, 11 marks last week, gets up as that high half forward at the stoppage, gets plenty of the ball. And maybe this is the week with that limited player pool that we can maybe look to target him. Because personally, I'm not really keen on a Toby Green this week. So maybe it is a Myers over a Green if you're looking maybe at that F6 spot there in the forward line.
Yeah, his marks were up last weekend, if you're looking at that as well. So it's like he's gone back to doing what he's doing. And I don't like playing fantasy where, you say, that injury could happen, or he could get injured. He's been injury prone in the past. This could happen because, sometimes it just doesn't like. It's not a way you should be playing fantasy. I don't think so. Yeah, and look, I like a Brian Myers. I'm more confident in a Jets.
Worst case scenario, obviously fingers crossed, nothing happens, but his score drops off if that happens, if he gets injured. So we do have that safety net there, and if you think he's got a ceiling score in him, then by all means, you definitely should be playing a Brian Myers this week. And like you said, not thinking about the risk of what a potential re-injury might look like.
Which he does have. We know he's got a ceiling score as well.
100%.
He can hit those big scores. He had a 145 in round 3, 138 in round 0. That's the sort of form we know from a Brian Myers. So if you've got him rounding out your side, I think you can do a lot worse. Yeah. But why aren't you keen on a Toby Green? Coming off a 120, he's now facing Melbourne. I know it's at TIO. Actually, I probably know why you're not keen on him. I'll let you mention it in a sec. But if you look at the matchup data itself, if you're looking at Melbourne, for example, they're not a great matchup to target. They are the 8th hardest matchup for opposition forwards. And I've looked at forwards there for a reason. Yep. But recently, they are slightly more positive. So they are, 7th best matchup for opposition forwards. So it's been a slight shift recently in that Melbourne matchup data. But I think he's been really consistent outside of that really poor game he had a couple of weeks ago against the Eagles, where he dropped a 50 on us. Thanks, Toby.
Yeah, and look, I think I'm probably scarred from that one, to be honest. Look, I was nowhere near even thinking about picking him last week for the matchup against Brisbane. Obviously, he relied on 5 goals to get to his score of was 120 GDS points last week.
120. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like,
CBAs was 0%.
yeah, 0%. And I think that's the reason why I'm not keen on him this week. He is reliant now pretty much solely as a forward to kick goals. And I just don't think the matchup, they're not going to smash Melbourne by 80 odd points like they did Brisbane last week. I don't see that happening. The week before, like you mentioned, West Coast, which was a great matchup for Toby. He only had the 11 disposals and failed to kick a goal. And then the week before against the Bombers, another good matchup. He had 53% CBAs against the Bombers, which helped him kind of pick up his floor score, but he kicked the 3 goals, 1 in that game. So
the week before, Gold Coast, 9% CBAs, and he stunk that up too. He saved his score late from memory for a 90
just so inconsistent and goal reliant, and I just don't see like with Jordan De Goey, for example, is not on screen right now. Someone who has a solid role within the midfield can go forward and kick goals in the matchups that present, whereas Toby Green is just relying on kicking bags of goals to even potentially put him in that frame of just being reliable. And to me, he's just too up and down, and I don't want a bar of it.
That's very aggressive, mate. You really have an issue with Toby Green here. You and Tom, GDS Tom, you two want to punch on with Toby Green, and he'd have you both covered, I reckon.
Oh, he'd probably karate kick me in the head or something.
Talking it through, I agree with you. That's one thing I talk about is I like a role, like the role when we pick our forwards, and it hasn't been there. And again, are we seeing the turnaround in GWS? I'm not sure.
No, the Lions
we'll have to see.
Terrible.
Yeah, well, Melbourne have been playing pretty well. I know they didn't get the Chockies on the weekend, but in Darwin, Melbourne scrap. Melbourne are a good team, so yeah, it could be the little flag there, mate, if he's not running through the gut. So I really like that shout, and something for all coaches to consider. So if you're going somebody else, then could you look at some of those pods on screen? Now, you mentioned a Jordan De Goey. I'm actually really going to consider a Jordan De Goey this week to replace a Toby Green for me because of his role and the score he put up there. So Jordan De Goey, we love him. Bulldogs, we've said they're not the best matchup to target. They're fine for opposition mids, but JDG, he's in great form, clear role, and he's going to be rounding out our forward line. And they're probably a better matchup for forwards than midfielders. So, yeah, I can see him pushing forward there, posing a bit of a threat, getting around the ground, taking his marks. So I probably don't mind a JDG this week to replace Toby. Yeah. But are you keen on a Connor Buderick or a Bailey Williams? Bailey Williams is probably the flavour of this week.
Yeah, just quickly on Jordan De Goey. So we talked about it last week. His 96% CBAs the week before against Sydney, where he looked really good in that, the opening half of the game before kind of quieting down in the back half. But we talked about the potential one flag of everyone coming back into the side, Pendle's coming back in, what that potentially might look like for his midfield minutes. He still had 79% CBAs, which was just behind Nick Dacos as the number 2 banana for the Pies last weekend. So the roles there, he's clear in that midfield. He's locked and loaded. He drifts forward in games, can impact the scoreboard. Probably not as good as matchup for opposition midfielders this week. Obviously, yes, I know we're talking about forwards, but if he is playing in the midfield against the Dogs, they're probably a neutral matchup for midfielders. So maybe that's something to consider. But in our forward lines, you're probably only looking for a score of, that solid 100, 105 GDS points and locking it in, which I think De Goey's giving us recently. I think he's gone 190, 100, 130. So it's reliable, it's consistent, the role's there. So I'm definitely keen on De Goey over definitely someone like a Green. And then, if we're looking at our points of difference, I don't mind either of them, actually. I think, Bailey Williams is definitely the flavour this week, obviously, after his 2 big performances in a row where he's gone 154 and 125. And obviously, once again, as someone as a ruck that has that ability to, impact the scoreboard with, when I say scoreboard, scoring of his own with hit outs, that just gives him that nice little floor of that 30 potential points every week before, you add on your disposals, your marks, your tackles, and potential goals as well. The Bombers this week aren't coming up he's not coming up really against a recognised ruckman now that Peter Wright is out of the side. They've got Nick Bryan in there. I actually can't really remember who played ruck for them on Friday night against the Tigers. So look, he should be good once again over in Perth as well, back at home. The form's there. He's realised that he's actually a pretty decent footballer, and they're looking to use him. So yeah, I don't mind a Bailey Williams whatsoever this week.
Yeah, I looked at him a lot at the start of the week. I thought that he would be a really good pick, but something to mention that obviously Bombers then, if you're looking at the matchup data, they're not the best matchup. Now I know you just mentioned Peter Wright is out of the side, so that does change things a little bit. They've had Blackiston typically rolling through there early in the season. They went away from that though.
He was the one that went back into the ruck last week. I just couldn't remember. So yeah, he split the role with Brian last week.
He and Brian. Yeah, so that's not a great matchup. It's actually that's not fantastic. If you're looking at matchup data there, they're the 9th hardest, so almost pretty neutral. And Bailey Smith, Bailey Smith. Think about Bailey Smith. Bailey Smith doesn't play in the ruck. Bailey Williams, he's just, again, like he had that great score in round 5, 127, and then he had some really poor scores. I looked at him against Richmond. He didn't do what I thought he would do against Richmond because, again, they were rolling a Noah Bolter and he just jumped over the top. I am actually a little bit worried about this one this week, just with that matchup and the fact, again, new coach, bit unpredictable. I don't know. This feels like it should be a good pick, but for some reason my spider senses are tingling.
Okay, interesting. Like I think obviously, we know that the Essendon matchup hasn't really been there all season, and we've been talking about, this potential curse when it comes to ruckman and targeting this matchup, especially with Blackiston as the starting ruck. But I think you just got to look at the form that he's in, the matchup. Like obviously, yes, Essendon is looking to bounce back, new coach, but you got to look at how injury depleted they are, who we up against, hit the foot
and the role.
The role. That's it. And I think in our forward line as well, we've got to remember that we're only looking. It's not our ruck line. We don't expect 120 plus every week. If he gets to 90 in the forward line, I'm pretty happy. So that's something that I'm definitely considering, and I think he's going to be a very popular play for coaches across comps this week.
Okay, so lowest score of 51 in round 6 for Bailey.
And I think
Williams.
he's improved out of sight since then.
So round 6, who did West Coast play against? Do you want to have a look at that? His next lowest score outside of that, 76 in round 7, 79 in round 9, 82 in round 8. So, like, they're your next lowest. So, really, I guess if you're getting that in your forward line, there's every chance you cop that anyway with who you pick. But, for me, yes, my spider senses are tingling. But Bailey Williams, as you said, it's the role. He's in the ruck. He's around the contest. As you said, great form. Maybe I should be picking him.
So he played those poor scores. Dockers was the one where he went 51. Saints, 76, another tough matchup.
Tough.
Tigers, which is probably the one that we're probably going, I probably should have scored well against, but I think you mentioned it was Noah Bolter that kind of got a hold of him that game. 80.
And he got an 82.
Demons, obviously, double team of Max Gawn and Max Heath, tough. 79, and then he's gone massive. So obviously Cats as well earlier in the year when he became relevant. First game as a starting ruck for the season, 127 in a positive matchup.
That was at Optus as well.
No, that was at Gather Round. That was at Norwood. So,
that's right.
So no, I think, look, it's one of those things that you're talking about consistency and reliability in the forward line. I think that the form that he's in, it's hard to ignore.
Okay. I'm with you now. I'm on board. Let's get on board the Bailey Williams train. Anyone got a bronze?
Yeah, hit us up. We'll join the queue.
Cougars, if you're out there, mate. Yeah, just put up a plat Bailey Smith and I'll flick one through. Now, mate, Buderick obviously playing off half back line, good matchup against the Pies. You can go there. Riley Sanders I like as well with a midfield role, a couple of Bulldogs. Bolton, avoid him. Brisbane Lions matchup. Yeah, so pick him, he'll put 120.
Last time we put Bolton as the avoid, he actually went 158. So let's hopefully it doesn't do that again.
Exactly, but he can do that. Now, look, contender team, there's my contender team there. You can have a bit of a look at. It is pretty vanilla, but I think after those discussions, mate, I think that Toby Green will make his way out.
And replace him with Bailey Williams.
Yeah, Bailey Williams or maybe Jordan De Goey.
Yeah.
I guess it's the Toby Green and the Grind Myers. They're the two I'm not convinced on. So it could be, I think I've ruled Green out after our conversation. Myers is still in the conversation. Bailey Williams has entered the chat. And Jordan De Goey's into the chat as well. So I think it's probably out of those three there for me, rounding out my forward line. Same in the midfield. We had that discussion there. So Zachy Merritt, I think I'm going to lock and load him. He'll play. But it'll be maybe does a Lockie Neal come out for a Maxi Holmes now? That's probably the discussion there. And then, as you can see in the back line, probably a pretty stock standard back line potentially. Got Zorko rolling through there. He might be the one some coaches want to go away from, given the matchup. Frio's not amazing, and he's coming back off that injury.
Just quickly on Zorko, I did just see a report, and I don't know how true this is, that he might have twinged whatever injury that he does have at training. I'm just bringing up the AFL injury list now because apparently he's been re-evaluated as a 2 to 3 week injury.
Oh, you
So
kidding?
I'm just trying to bring that up as we speak.
All right. So that's going to mean effectively I'll need to find someone else in my back line.
Yeah, so...
And obviously any coaches looking at a Dane Zorko will have to do the same thing.
Just trying to find when this was updated, but the most up-to-date injury list on the AFL.com website has Zorko listed as soreness and 2 weeks as his estimated return.
When was that? Was that today?
Updated as of today.
Wow. That's big news. Okay.
Yeah, so
he'll have to come
Zorko
out.
is still sore and likely to miss another 2 matches.
That's not what we got out of the club last week. Anyway, that's not our podcast. Anyhow, something to keep in mind, don't play a Zorko. If that's the case, keep an eye on teams, keep an eye on that news coming out this week. Now, to speed this up here, mate, let's have a bit of a look. Actually, I'll do that in a second there. Our BroDown Showdown. We went up against Supercoach Swordplay last week. You can see they took out the win. Shout out to Jonathan Roscoe there, Supercoach Swordplay, doing an awesome job. We love all their content as well and the support they give us. Make sure you're getting behind those boys. They're also in the Discord, but they took out our win. So it was 2 apiece. And it was Riley Sanders who hit that ceiling score with a 122 to take out the win for them. But it was a tight contest, mate. It came right down to that last game. So that was pretty exciting.
Yeah, that was a really exciting round of BroDown Showdown. I thoroughly enjoyed that one. So, hopefully when we get back to the second edition of our content creator edition, Fantasy Bros versus the Swordplay boys, hopefully we can get one back and make it 1-1 and make it a best of 3 series.
Yeah, we've got to get back. We've got to get back at them, mate. And we had 3 coaches that selected Supercoach Swordplay boys in the chat for their BroDown Showdown. So we had Mian, Michael Cossey, and Reese MB as well. That's Russman, I believe, in the Discord server. So we'll shuffle the wheel and we'll see who is going to take out a row in our pack. And you've got the pack code there, mate, as well, just checking.
I do. It's our good friend Mian.
Well done, Mian. He's going to take out a row here. Congrats, mate. And Haz will get his screen for us.
All right, so congratulations to our good friend Mian. He is getting a common all-star pack as well as the Swordplay boys as well. It's a row each. Obviously, all-stars have been exhausted, but we are still going to rip this pack and hope for some good pulls here.
Let's see what we can get. Some nice cards, hopefully, here.
Alrighty, so are you going to choose? Are we going to go for Mian first? What rows Mian going to get?
Look, I'm actually going to go the top row for Mian because I think he's going to be sitting at the top of some leaderboards this weekend. So top row for Mian, please.
So we've got a silver Tom Lynch who's out with that larynx injury this week, I think. Silver Tom Liberatore, which is not a bad card, and then a silver Campbell Gray.
Nice. A couple handy ones there. Anyway, obviously, Libba is going to be a nice one to be holding onto your collection. So congratulations, Mian. And then we're going to split up the rows for Roscoe and Janeth.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's give them a row each.
All right, go. Janeth can have the Janeth can have the middle. Let's go middle for Janeth.
Got a silver Cochrane from Port Adelaide.
Silver pack.
ZZ Talk from Brisbane. And then an Allen from West Coast.
Okay. And then a bottom row for Roscoe. What do we got? Something better for Roscoe, hopefully.
Tyrone Printable, Queensland boy for Collingwood.
Boy. Yeah. Shout out to Ty.
Mitch Lewis for Hawthorn. And then a Jade Cole Jasny. It's not a greatest packed So maybe it's a good thing we didn't win the Fantasy Bros Sunday Showdown last week.
Meant to do it. Meant to do that. Alrighty, so our next BroDown Showdown, get your comment in the chat. It's going to be Haz and myself. We're going in a standard pod edition. So it's going to be Haz is taking Carl Amon as his defender. I'll have Jake Bowie in the midfield, Clayton Oliver up against Darcy Parish for me. In our utility spots, it's Haz's Harley Reid to my Chad Warner. Hang on, I've actually got a Corey Warner there.
That's it. That's final. You made the mistake. That's the pick. So everyone, that is a Corey Warner for reference.
No, it is a Chad. It's Chad. He's going to be in there. It is not a Corey Warner. That is a Cal mistake. Cal made that mistake. And now I've made that in the BroDown Showdown. It is Chad Warner, not Corey Warner. Reid against Chad Warner. And then we've got Riley Sanders up against my Connor Butterick.
We're going to have to have a look at the terms and conditions of our laws there, because I think you're pushing the boundaries.
I make the rules, man. I can do whatever I want. Get your comment in the chat there. Who do you reckon is going to take it out? Obviously, best of 3 there. If it's a tie 2-2, then it goes to the highest scorer there too. So some great pods outside of our standard plays each week. We can pick from there.
Corey Warner is a very big pod, so yeah.
Even spicier than a Chad Warner. But again, new coaches, use that code on screen, FBAR26. Make sure you sign up to GameDay Squad, get involved, and make sure you follow all our Fantasy Bros socials. As we mentioned at the start, we love everyone's support. And our next live round preview show will be round 13, Wednesday the 3rd of June at 7:30 p.m. It's been a pleasure. We should do this more often.
Yes, thanks, mate. Always a pleasure. Thanks, viewers. Thanks, listeners. And if you guys have any questions or about anything, just hit us up on the Discord over the next couple of days. No doubt we'll answer your messages and hopefully answer some of those questions as well. So thank you. And as always, Pitty, thank you.
Thanks, mate. Have a great one, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode by the Fantasy Bros. If you want to show your support, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this show on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Also, make sure you check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search @FantasyBros AU.